Steve Jobs, by Walter Isaacson. Introduction. Imagine you're one of the most successful marketing executives in the world. You're at the top of your game, the president of Pepsi-Cola, in a boardroom battle with Coca-Cola. Life is comfortable, secure. Then one day, a young man, not even 30 years old, with fiery eyes and the restless energy of a revolutionary, asks you to leave it all behind. He wants you to come run his little computer company, a company named after a piece of fruit. You're hesitant. It sounds crazy. You tell him no. But he keeps coming back. He's intense, charismatic, almost hypnotic. Finally, on a balcony overlooking New York's Central Park, he looks you in the eye and delivers a challenge that will echo for decades. Do you want to spend the rest of your life selling sugared water? He asks, his voice quiet but sharp, or do you want a chance to change the world? The executive's name was John Scully, and in that moment, he knew he couldn't say no. Because the young man asking the question was Steve Jobs. And that question, that simple, audacious question, captures the very essence of the man we're going to talk about today. Walter Isaacson's biography, Steve Jobs, isn't just the story of a company. It's the exclusive, unfiltered look into the mind of a man who was a bundle of contradictions. He was a Zen Buddhist who could be a tyrant, a college dropout who revolutionized 6 industries, an artist who was also a master engineer, a hippie who built the most valuable company on earth. This book is based on over 40 interviews with Jobs himself, conducted in the final years of his life, along with conversations with more than 100 of his family members, friends, competitors, and adversaries. He gave Isaacson complete control, asking for nothing to be off limits. And today, my goal is to distill that incredible, roller coaster life into its most powerful lessons. By the end of our time together, you won't just understand what Steve Jobs built. You'll understand how he thought. You'll see the invisible forces that drove him, the demons that haunted him, and the passions that allowed him to put, as he famously said, a dent in the universe. So, let's begin. Let's explore the life of the man who thought different. Book summary. To understand Steve Jobs, you have to start with 2 words that defined his entire life: abandoned and chosen. He was born in San Francisco in 1955 to 2 unwed graduate students. His biological mother, Joanne Schiebel, had made one firm requirement for the adoption: her son had to be raised by college graduates. A lawyer and his wife were chosen. But when the baby was born, they changed their minds. They wanted a girl. So, the baby was offered to another couple on the waiting list. A high school dropout and his bookkeeper wife, Paul and Clara Jobs. They weren't college graduates, but they were kind, stable, and more than anything, they wanted a child. When Joanne found out, she refused to sign the papers. For weeks, a battle raged. Finally, she relented, but only after making Paul and Clara sign a pledge, a promise, that they would send this boy to college. From his earliest days, Steve knew he was adopted. One afternoon, when he was 6 years old, a girl across the street asked him, "So does that mean your real parents didn't want you?" He said, "Lightning bolts went off in my head." He ran into the house, crying. His parents sat him down and looked him straight in the eye. They were serious, and their words were deliberate. "No," they said. "We specifically picked you out. Abandoned, chosen, special." Those 3 words became the core of his identity. He would later dismiss the idea that his abandonment left him with scars, but his closest friends saw it differently. They saw a man who needed absolute control over his products, because he couldn't control the fact that he was given up at birth. A man who was fiercely independent, who marched to the beat of a different drummer, because he felt he was born into a world that wasn't his own. His father, Paul Jobs, was a machinist and a car mechanic. He wasn't a man of letters, but he was a man of incredible craftsmanship. In the family garage in Mountain View, California, the very heart of what was becoming Silicon Valley, he taught his son a lesson that would define the Apple philosophy. He was building a fence one day, and he told Steve, "You've got to make the back of the fence, the part that nobody will see, just as beautiful as the front." Why? Because a true craftsman uses great wood for the back of a cabinet, even though no one will ever see it. You will know it's there. And for you to sleep well at night, the aesthetic, the quality, has to be carried all the way through. Steve wasn't that interested in fixing cars. But he was fascinated by the world of electronics that was blooming all around him. The neighborhood was filled with engineers from Hewlett-Packard and other early tech companies. As a kid, he joined the HP Explorers Club, a place where engineers would show off what they were working on. He was in heaven. One day, he decided he wanted to build a frequency counter, but he needed some parts from HP. He was just 13 years old. So he did something that only Steve Jobs would do. He looked up the co-founder, Bill Hewlett, in the phone book, and called him at home. Hewlett not only gave him the parts, he offered him a summer job on the assembly line. This was the world that forged him, the intersection of California's counterculture, the hippies, the spiritual seekers, the rebels, and the disciplined world of engineering. And it was in high school that he met the other half of the Apple founding story, Stephen Wozniak. Woz, as everyone called him, was a true wizard. He was 5 years older than Jobs, but emotionally, he was a gentle, shy, and brilliant geek who lived for electronics. While Jobs was a visionary, Wozniak was a builder. He could design circuit boards with a breathtaking elegance and efficiency that no one else could match. They bonded over two things: playing pranks and Bob Dylan. They would hunt for bootleg Dylan tapes, stay up all night trying to decipher the lyrics, and feel a deep connection to the rebel spirit in his music. Their partnership was perfectly captured in their first real venture together. Wozniak read an article in Esquire magazine about phone phreaks, hackers who had figured out how to make free long-distance calls. The key was a device called a blue box, which could replicate the musical tones that a tant used to route calls. Wozniak, being the genius he was, designed his own digital blue box, the best one ever made. For him, it was a fun puzzle, a way to show off his engineering talent. He was happy to just give the designs away for free. But Steve Jobs saw something else. He saw a product. "Why don't we build and sell them?" he suggested. This became the template for their entire partnership. Wozniak, the gentle genius, would create a brilliant piece of technology for the sheer joy of it. And Jobs, the focused visionary, would figure out how to package it, market it, and turn it into a business. They sold about 100 blue boxes and had some fun, even trying to prank call the Pope at the Vatican. Jobs would later say, "If it hadn't been for the blue boxes, there wouldn't have been an Apple." It wasn't about the money. It was about confidence. They learned they could work together to take on giant systems and bend them to their will. After high school, Jobs went to Reed College, an expensive liberal arts school in Oregon. His parents drained their savings to send him there, fulfilling the promise they'd made years before. But Jobs quickly grew bored with the required classes. He was more interested in Eastern spirituality, Zen Buddhism, and calligraphy. He was also experimenting with LSD, which he later called one of the most profound experiences of his life. After just one semester, he dropped out. But he didn't leave. He hung around campus for another year and a half, auditing the classes that fascinated him. He learned about serif and sans serif typefaces, about what makes great typography great. It seemed useless at the time, but he was connecting dots that no one else saw. If I had never dropped in on that single course in college, he later said, the Mac would have never had multiple typefaces or proportionally spaced fonts. He was living a bohemian life, returning soda bottles for change and getting free meals at the local Hare Krishna temple. Then, he went on a spiritual pilgrimage to India, seeking enlightenment. He came back with a shaved head, wearing Indian robes, and with a new perspective. He realized his calling wasn't to be a monk in a monastery. It was to create. It was to merge the spirituality and artistry he had found with the technology he had grown up with. The place for him was back in Silicon Valley. He got a job back at Atari, the video game company, and reconnected with Wozniak. Woz had been attending meetings of a ragtag group of hobbyists called the Homebrew Computer Club. It was a place where geeks showed off their latest creations, sharing ideas and code freely. And one day, Wozniak brought something that was truly revolutionary. He had designed a personal computer circuit board. For the first time in history, he had created a system where you could type a character on a keyboard and see it instantly appear on a screen. Again, Wozniak was ready to give his designs away for free. And again, it was Steve Jobs who said, "Let's sell them." In 1976, in the garage of Jobs' parents' house, Apple Computer was born. Jobs sold his VW bus and Wozniak sold his fancy calculator to raise the capital. Their first order was from a local computer store, the Byte Shop. They needed 50 fully assembled computers. The problem? They didn't have the money for the parts. Jobs, with a bravado that would become his trademark, walked into an electronics supplier, convinced them the order was real, and got the parts on credit. For the next 30 days, the Jobs' garage became an assembly line. His sister, friends, and even his father helped solder chips onto the boards. They delivered the order just in time. The Apple I was a success for hobbyists. But Jobs had a bigger vision. He didn't want to sell circuit boards to geeks. He wanted to sell a complete, friendly product to everyone. This led to the Apple II. While Wozniak engineered another masterpiece of a circuit board, Jobs focused on the whole widget. He wanted an end-to-end user experience. He found a venture capitalist, Mike Markula, to invest in the company and provide some much-needed adult supervision. He hired a designer to create a sleek, friendly plastic case, a stark contrast to the intimidating metal boxes of other computers. He even obsessed over the power supply, insisting it run silently, without a fan, because fans were not Zen. The Apple II, launched in 1977, was the product that kicked off the personal computer revolution. It was the first computer that felt like a consumer appliance. It made Apple a major company and made Jobs a millionaire. But for Jobs, the Apple II was always Wozniak's creation. He needed a machine of his own. A machine that would truly make a dent in the universe. That machine would be the Macintosh. The project began as a low-cost computer for the masses, but Jobs took it over and infused it with his own grand vision. He had recently visited a legendary research center called Xerox PARC, where he saw something that changed his life, a graphical user interface. Instead of typing cryptic commands, you could use a mouse to point and click on icons on a screen. Jobs famously said, "Good artists copy, great artists steal." He didn't just steal the idea, he made it 1,000 times better. The Macintosh project became his obsession. He drove his team with a relentless, often brutal, intensity. He assembled a group of brilliant, rebellious engineers and designers, his pirates, and pushed them to do the impossible. He believed you could only get A+ players to do their best work if you refused to tolerate anything less than greatness. His mantra was real artistship, but he also believed that perfection was worth fighting for. He would call ideas shit one day, and then present them as his own a week later. He would stare at people without blinking, pushing them past their limits. This was the birth of his famous reality distortion field, a confounding mix of charismatic charm, relentless will, and a willingness to bend any fact to fit his purpose. It was maddening to work for him, but it was also inspiring. His team believed they were on a mission from God to change the world. To launch the Macintosh, Jobs didn't just plan an announcement, he orchestrated an event. He hired the director Ridley Scott to create a stunning television commercial that would air during the 1984 Super Bowl. The 1984 AD depicted a lone, rebellious heroine shattering a screen where a big brother-like figure was droning onto a mindless audience. The message was clear: Apple was the rebel, the force of individual freedom against the monolithic conformity of IBM. The Macintosh, launched in 1984, was a masterpiece. It was insanely great. It didn't just change computing, it changed our relationship with technology. It made it personal, creative, and accessible. But the success brought new tensions. Jobs' rebellious style clashed with the corporate culture he had helped create. He was now running a billion-dollar company, but he still acted like the pirate captain of a small, agile ship. He got into a power struggle with the man he had personally recruited to be CEO, John Sculley, the same man he had challenged to stop selling sugared water. Jobs thought Sculley was a bozo who didn't understand products. Sculley thought Jobs was an uncontrollable manager who was sowing chaos. In the spring of 1985, the board sided with Sculley. Steve Jobs was stripped of all his operational duties. He was exiled. At the age of 30, the man who had founded Apple was effectively fired from his own company. This was the end of Act One. It was a devastating, public humiliation. Jobs felt betrayed, abandoned once again. But as he would later say, getting fired from Apple was the best thing that could have ever happened to me. The heaviness of being successful was replaced by the lightness of being a beginner again. It freed him to enter one of the most creative periods of his life. This was his time in the wilderness. He started a new computer company called NeXT. Freed from any constraints, he indulged his perfectionism to an extreme. He wanted to build the most perfect computer ever made. The NeXT computer was a flawless black magnesium cube. Jobs obsessed over every detail, from the invisible screws inside to the multi-million-dollar, fully automated factory he built to manufacture it. The result was a computer that was technologically brilliant, stunningly beautiful, and a commercial flop. It was too expensive and too far ahead of its time. At the same time, he bought a small computer graphics company from George Lucas for $5 million. It was called Pixar. At Pixar, Jobs learned a new way to manage. He had always believed in hiring A-plus players, but at Pixar, he was surrounded by a different kind of genius, artists and storytellers like John Lasseter and Ed Catmull. He couldn't bully them into creativity. He had to learn to trust them, to give them space, to be a patron. Pixar was hemorrhaging money. Jobs personally funded it for years, pouring in over $50 million of his own fortune. The company was trying to sell high-end graphics computers, but Jobs, learning from NeXT, realized this wasn't the path. The real magic was in the short animated films Lasseter's team was making to show off the technology. He bet the company on a feature film. That film was Toy Story. The process was rocky. Jobs got into a brutal negotiation with Disney's CEO, Michael Eisner, and ended up with a deal that gave Disney most of the profits and creative control. But Toy Story, released in 1995, became a blockbuster. It wasn't just a technological marvel, it was a masterpiece of storytelling. The week after Toy Story opened, Pixar went public. By the end of the day, Steve Jobs, the man who had been written off as a failure, was a billionaire. During this time, his personal life was also transforming. He finally tracked down his biological mother and discovered he had a full sister, the novelist Mona Simpson. They became incredibly close. He also began to build a relationship with his first daughter, Lisa, whom he had denied was his for years. And he met the woman who would become the anchor of his life, Lauren Powell. She was smart, grounded, and tough enough to handle his intensity. They married in 1991 in a simple Zen ceremony and started a family. For the first time, he had a stable home life. While Jobs was building NeXT and Pixar, Apple was falling apart. Without his vision, the company had lost its way. It was churning out a confusing array of beige box computers, losing market share to Microsoft, and was on the brink of bankruptcy. After a series of failed CEOs, the board brought in a man named Gil Amelio. In a desperate move to find a new operating system, Amelio made a fateful decision in late 1996. He bought NeXT for over $400 million. And just like that, Steve Jobs was back inside Apple. He returned first as an advisor, but his presence was electric. He quickly saw that the company was in chaos. "The products suck," he told a stunned group of executives. "There's no sex in them anymore." The board soon realized what was inevitable. In July 1997, 12 years after he was forced out, Steve Jobs was named interim CEO of Apple. The second coming had begun. His first move was to refocus the company. He took a magic marker to a whiteboard and drew a simple four-square grid. The two columns were consumer and pro. The two rows were desktop and portable. Apple, he declared, would now make only 4 products. One for each quadrant. Everything else was canceled. He slashed 70% of the product line. It was brutal, but it brought a laser-like focus back to the company. Next, he needed to remind the world, and Apple's own employees, who they were. He rehired the ad agency that had created the 1984 AD, and together they launched the Think Different campaign. It didn't feature any products. Instead, it showed black-and-white portraits of icons like Albert Einstein, Martin Luther King Jr., and Pablo Picasso. The rebels. The misfits. The crazy ones. The message was a manifesto for Apple's soul. It was a promise that Apple was once again a company for the creative spirits who wanted to change the world. Then came the products. Working with a brilliant British designer named Johnny Ive, who would become his creative soulmate, Jobs launched the iMac in 1998. It was a stunning, all-in-one computer in a translucent Bondi blue shell. It was playful, friendly, and unlike any computer anyone had ever seen. It was a massive hit and saved the company. But Jobs had a grander vision. He saw that the personal computer was about to become something more, a digital hub for managing our entire digital lives, our music, our photos, our videos. This strategy led to the creation of the iPod in 2001. At the time, MP3 players were clunky, held only a handful of songs, and were impossible to use. Jobs saw an opportunity. He declared the mission in the simplest possible terms: 1,000 songs in your pocket. The iPod was a marvel of integration. The hardware was beautiful, pure white with a polished steel back. The software, iTunes, made it effortless to manage your music. And the user interface, with its simple scroll wheel, was a joy to use. You could get to any song in just 3 clicks. Then came the iTunes Store, which revolutionized the music industry. Jobs personally negotiated with all the major record labels, convincing them to sell their songs for 99 cents each. He argued that the only way to beat piracy was to offer a legal alternative that was simpler and better. The iPod wasn't just a product, it was a cultural phenomenon. And it transformed Apple. It was no longer just a computer company. But Jobs was just getting started. He was always paranoid about what could disrupt his business. And he knew the biggest threat to the iPod was the cell phone. What if phone makers started building music players into their phones? His answer was the iPhone. He challenged his team to create a phone with a revolutionary interface. The breakthrough was multi-touch. Instead of a clumsy physical keyboard, the entire front of the phone would be a screen that you could control with your fingers, pinching to zoom, swiping to scroll. He obsessed over every detail, from the swipe to open slider to the feel of the Gorilla Glass screen, which he personally sourced from Corning. When the iPhone was launched in 2007, he called it 3 revolutionary products in one: a widescreen iPod with touch controls, a revolutionary mobile phone, and a breakthrough internet communications device. It wasn't just a new phone, it redefined the entire category. And with it came the App Store, which unleashed the creativity of thousands of developers and created a whole new industry. Jobs had one more act. He had always been fascinated with tablet computers, but he believed they had all been done wrong. They all had styluses. "God gave us 10 styluses," he would say, holding up his fingers. "Let's not invent another one." He took the multi-touch technology from the iPhone and applied it to a larger screen. The result was the iPad. When it launched in 2010, many critics were skeptical. What was it for? But Jobs understood something fundamental about desire. People don't know what they want until you show it to them. The iPad created a whole new category of device, sitting somewhere between a laptop and a smartphone. It was perfect for browsing the web, watching movies, reading books, and playing games. It was intimate, simple, and magical. The string of hits, iMac, iPod, iPhone, iPad, was the greatest run of product innovation in modern history. And it was all driven by Jobs' core philosophy, a deep belief in the integration of hardware, software, and services. A passion for simplicity. And an artist's obsession with design. Through all this success, however, a shadow lingered. Jobs had been diagnosed with a rare form of pancreatic cancer back in 2003. At first, he tried to fight it with alternative medicine and diet, a decision he later regretted. He had surgery in 2004, but the cancer eventually returned. For the next 7 years, he fought the disease with the same intensity he brought to everything else. He was one of the first people in the world to have his entire tumor genome sequenced, allowing his doctors to use cutting-edge, targeted therapies to fight the cancer as it mutated. His illness forced him to confront his own mortality. In 2005, he gave a commencement address at Stanford University that became his most famous reflection on life. He told 3 stories, one about connecting the dots, one about love and loss, and one about death. "Remembering that you are going to die," he told the students, "is the best way I know to avoid the trap of thinking you have something to lose. You are already naked. There is no reason not to follow your heart." He had a liver transplant in 2009 and returned to Apple, gaunt but still driven, to launch the iPad. But by 2011, his health was failing again. That August, knowing his time was short, he resigned as CEO of Apple. "I have always said if there ever came a day when I could no longer meet my duties and expectations as Apple's CEO, I would be the first to let you know," he wrote in a simple 8-sentence letter. Unfortunately, that day has come. He spent his final weeks at home, surrounded by his family, looking at old photographs and listening to the music he loved. He died on October 5, 2011. He was 56 years old. The legacy he left was not just a collection of insanely great products. It was a company infused with his DNA. A company that believed in the power of creativity, simplicity, and the magic that happens at the intersection of technology and the liberal arts. He was a complicated man. He could be a visionary and a tyrant, inspiring and infuriating. But more than anything, He was a man who believed in the power of human ingenuity to change the world. And he did. Commentary. So, what do we take away from a life as immense and complex as Steve Jobs's? It's tempting to try and boil it down to a simple formula for success, but his life wasn't a formula. It was a work of art, full of jagged edges and breathtaking beauty. But there are a few core lessons that shine through, principles that are as relevant to a student in their dorm room as they are to a CEO in a boardroom. First, is the relentless pursuit of focus. When Jobs returned to Apple in 1997, the company was drowning in a sea of mediocre products. He didn't try to fix them all. He got rid of almost everything. He famously drew that 4-quadrant grid on the whiteboard and said, "This is what we're going to do." That act of radical simplification saved the company. He believed that deciding what not to do is as important as deciding what to do. In our own lives, we're constantly pulled in 1,000 different directions. Jobs's life is a powerful reminder to ask ourselves, what are the essential few things that truly matter? And do we have the courage to say no to the rest? Second, is the belief in starting with the customer experience and working backward to the technology? Not the other way around. So many companies start with the engineering, with the specs, and then try to figure out how to sell it. Jobs started with the feeling. How should this product feel in your hand? What should the experience of unboxing it be like? How can we make it so simple that a child could use it without a manual? He believed that technology alone was not enough. It had to be married with the liberal arts, with the humanities, to create a result that makes our hearts sing. That's a profound lesson for anyone creating anything. Don't just build a product. Build an experience. Build a feeling. And finally, there's his unwavering belief in his own intuition. He never relied on market research or focus groups. As he famously said, people don't know what they want until you show it to them. He trusted his own taste, his own sense of what was insanely great. This wasn't just arrogance, it was a deep confidence in his ability to see around the corner, to connect dots that others didn't even know existed. It's a call to action for all of us to trust our own instincts a little more, to believe in our own unique perspective, even when, especially when, it goes against the conventional wisdom. His life wasn't a blueprint for how to be a nice person. He was often difficult, impatient, and even cruel. But it is a testament to the power of passion. He cared. He cared about every pixel, every screw, every curve. He cared about making products that were not just useful, but beautiful and magical. He believed that the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do. And in the end, his greatest legacy might be that he inspires us to believe that we can too. That was Book Summary of Steve Jobs by Walter Isaacson. We've hit the highlights today, but I'll be honest with you, a summary can only take you so far. The real magic happens when you read the book yourself. It's in the quiet moments, when a particular story or a simple phrase hits you in a way you didn't expect. This summary is designed to help you decide if this book is worth your time. If anything we've talked about today has resonated with you, grab a copy, because reading it isn't just learning, it's an experience that can genuinely change the way you see yourself in your daily life. Also, if you found this summary valuable, please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our next journey into another life-changing book in Billionaire's Bookshelf. Let's keep growing.